May 1945. The world is screaming. The thousand-year Reich is no longer a world power. It is a smoking, jagged ruin. As the Soviet Red Army hammers the gates of Berlin with 10,000 Katyusha rockets, the remaining elite units of the Waffen-SS are faced with a terrifying binary choice: surrender to the Russians and face certain execution in the gulags, or disappear into the shadows of history. One specific battalion, nearly 800 battle-hardened men, some of the most decorated and dangerous soldiers left on the continent, chose the shadows. They weren't just infantry. These were the remnants of a specialized mountain warfare unit, survivors of the brutal campaigns in the Caucasus and the Balkans. They didn't travel light. They were equipped with heavy Opel Blitz trucks, SDKFZ 251 half-tracks, horse-drawn supply wagons carrying gold bullion and classified archives, and enough small arms fire to hold off a full Soviet division for a week. Their mission was a desperate gamble: bypass the vengeful Czech partisans who were hunting Germans through the streets, cut through the black heart of the deep Bohemian forest, and surrender to the American 5th Infantry Division waiting on the other side of the mountains. They were spotted by a village watchman in the tiny hamlet of Horny Plana as the sun dipped below the jagged mountain peaks. He didn't see a defeated army. He described a silent iron snake, a column of men and machinery marching into the tree line with a precision that was chilling. They didn't look like men running from a war. They looked like men on a final, sacred mission. On the other side of that forest, the American commander, Colonel Stephen Hamilton, sat at the designated extraction point. His scouts had been in radio contact with a German intermediary. The deal was struck. The Germans would hand over their weapons, their vehicles, and several high-ranking officers in exchange for prisoner of war status under the Americans. Hamilton had been told to expect a massive surrender at 0600 hours the following morning. 0600 hours came. The forest was silent. Not even the birds sang. 1200 hours came. Only the sound of the wind whistling through the pines. By the third day, the Americans, fearing a trap or a sudden Soviet breakthrough, crossed the no-man's land and entered the forest to find their missing prisoners. What they found, or rather what they didn't find, has haunted military intelligence for 8 decades. The American scouts followed the heavy tire tracks of the Opel Blitz trucks. They were deep, clear, and easy to track. For the first 3 miles, the trail was obvious: broken branches, crushed ferns, the smell of diesel hanging in the damp air. And then, at a sharp, limestone-walled bend in a ravine known locally as the Devil's Throat, the tracks simply stopped. Not a skid mark from a sudden break, not a bogged-down truck in the soft mud, no discarded helmets, no empty ration tins, no shredded maps, no personal letters from home. It was as if a giant hand had reached down from the clouds and plucked 800 men and 40 heavy vehicles off the face of the earth. For 80 years, the theories have swirled like the mist in those trees. Did they fall into a hidden Nazi werewolf bunker system that suffered a catastrophic collapse? Were they intercepted by a Soviet eraser squad, a Spetsnaz precursor that sanitized the entire valley to hide a massacre? Or did they stumble into a geographic anomaly that the locals have whispered about for centuries? In this special investigation, we are declassifying the Bohemian Ghost Files. We are looking at the Soviet radio intercepts that recorded the battalion's final terrifying transmission, a message that made no sense to the High Command in 1945 and makes even less sense today. This isn't just a war story. This is a journey into a forest that doesn't like visitors. If you've ever wondered if an entire army can truly disappear, stay tuned, because the truth isn't just in the history books. It's buried under the moss, waiting for someone to scream.
The Tactical Nightmare. The Last Transmission. To understand how a battalion vanishes, you have to understand the environment of May 1945. This wasn't a standard retreat, it was a meat grinder. This was the Bohemian Pocket. The German Army Group's center, nearly 1 million men strong, was being squeezed between the hammer of the Soviet Union and the anvil of the United States. For any soldier wearing the SS runes on their collar, the hammer was a death sentence. The Soviets weren't taking SS prisoners, they were liquidating them on site in retaliation for the atrocities on the Eastern Front. The battalion's commander, Sturmbannführer Karl von Hauer, was a pragmatist. He knew his only hope for survival and the survival of his men was the anvil, the Americans. Von Hauer was no amateur. He was an expert in mountain logistics and unconventional warfare. He knew the main roads out of the pocket were death traps. The Czech resistance, emboldened by the approaching Red Army, had laid thousands of S-mines and felled massive ancient oaks to block the retreat. So von Hauer made a fateful decision. He took his men off the maps. He led them into the black heart of the Šumava. This is where the story turns from military history into something truly anomalous. To navigate a forest this dense with 40 heavy vehicles, you need perfect coordination. You need constant radio contact, and the Soviets were listening. At 02:45 a.m. on May 8th, the very day Germany would officially surrender, a Soviet listening post in Dresden picked up a high-frequency burst. It was coded using a late-model Enigma variant, but the Soviets, aided by captured German cryptographers, broke the gist of it within an hour. The message wasn't a call for reinforcements, it wasn't a report of enemy contact, it was a descent into madness. The translation of von Hauer's final broadcast read, "Directional equipment failed, compasses spinning, the fog is blue. I repeat, the fog is blue. We are seeing lights that shouldn't be here. The road is no longer under our feet. We are closing ranks. Something is Heil." The signal cut off mid-word, not a fade-out, a clean, violent snap of the frequency. The fog is blue. The road is no longer under our feet. To the Soviet commanders, this sounded like a unit that had succumbed to mass hysteria or perhaps the effects of a secret chemical weapon. They assumed the Americans had tested something experimental, a nerve agent or a hallucinogenic gas on the battalion to prevent them from falling into Soviet hands. But the American records, declassified in the late 90s, tell a different story. When Colonel Hamilton's scouts reached the dead zone where the tracks ended, they were prepared for a firefight. Instead, they found a silence so profound it felt heavy. One of the scouts, Sergeant Elias Thorne, wrote in his diary, "We reached the bend in the ravine. The tracks were fresh. You could still see the tread patterns of the Continental tires, and then they just stopped. It wasn't like they turned around. It wasn't like they were blown up. It was like the earth simply stopped being solid for them and then hardened again the moment they were gone. The ground was soft, mossy earth. If 40 multi-ton trucks and 800 men in jackboots had driven over it, the terrain should have been a mud pit. They should have sunk 6 inches. Instead, the scouts found the grass standing tall, the moss undisturbed, as if nothing heavier than a ghost had passed through in a century. The ambush theory was the first to be dismissed by the Pentagon. There were no spent shell casings, and 800 SS men wouldn't go down without firing 1 million rounds. There were no bloodstains in the soil, no shredded bark from machine gun fire hitting the trees. If 800 men were slaughtered, it was the cleanest, most surgical massacre in the history of human conflict. So where did the Iron Snake go? The local legends of the Šumava speak of Das Tor, the gate. The folklore of the region, dating back to the Middle Ages, says that in times of great bloodshed and extreme human suffering, the forest opens up to swallow the violence. To the villagers of Horní Plana, the SS didn't disappear, the forest simply accepted them into its stomach. But for the families of those 800 men, the silence was a vacuum. For the military, it was a tactical impossibility. And for the secret services of the rising Cold War, it was the start of a decades-long cover-up.
The Cold War cover-up, the KGB versus the CIA. In the decade following the Great Disappearance, the missing battalion didn't just become a ghost story, it became a geopolitical powder keg. We have to remember, 1945 wasn't the end of the war, it was just the beginning of a different, colder one. Joseph Stalin, a man who built his empire on paranoia, was absolutely convinced that the vanishing at the ravine was an elaborate American ruse. He didn't believe in ghosts, and he certainly didn't believe in blue fog. He believed in human treachery. Stalin's theory was simple. The Americans had kidnapped the unit. He believed the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA, had used a secret low-altitude glider fleet to snatch 800 of the world's most elite mountain soldiers right out of the forest. Why? To recruit them into a secret stay-behind army. Stalin feared these 800 SS men were being retrained in the Nevada desert to be dropped back behind Soviet lines during a future World War III. He accused the Americans of using chemical smokescreens, what the soldiers called the blue fog, to mask the extraction. The Kremlin sent S-Mersh, the Death to Spies unit, into the Šumava with orders to find the trucks. They didn't care about the men, they wanted the machinery and the gold. They dug up miles of forest floor, they drained local ponds, they interrogated every villager within 50 miles. Their conclusion? Nothing. The earth had swallowed the iron. The CIA, meanwhile, had an even darker suspicion. They didn't think the Soviets had captured the battalion, they thought the Soviets had deleted them. American intelligence spent the late 1940s tracking rumors of a Soviet vacuum bomb or a primitive fuel-air explosive that could vaporize organic matter while leaving the surrounding foliage intact. They sent honeypot spies and German-speaking agents into the Czech border regions, posing as foresters, trying to find so much as a single belt buckle or a discarded Luger. But in 1956, something happened that forced both superpowers to stop asking questions. A discovery was made that was so terrifying it led to a mutual, silent agreement to fence off the forest and forget the 800 men ever existed. A Czech woodcutter named Jan Marek, who lived off the grid in the dead zone of the forest, walked into a local police station in Prakačice. He wasn't looking for a reward, he was looking for a priest. Marek claimed he had found what he called the Cave of Steel. He described a hidden fissure in the limestone cliffs, one that only appeared when the sun hit the rock at a specific angle during the spring equinox. He followed the light and found an entrance leading into a massive, unnatural underground chamber. Inside, Marek described a scene that sounds like a fever dream. He claimed to see men made of dust, soldiers sitting perfectly upright in the cabs of trucks that looked brand new, no rust, no decay. But when he reached out to touch a soldier's sleeve, the entire figure, man and uniform, collapsed into a pile of fine gray ash. Before the Americans or the Soviets could reach him, Marek was relocated by the STB, the Czech secret police. Within 48 hours, every record of his testimony was purged. The forest wasn't just closed, it was erased from the maps. It was declared a border zone of high sensitivity. Why the sudden violent secrecy? If it was just a mass grave, the Soviets would have used it as a propaganda tool to show German cowardice. If it was a secret bunker, they would have looted the gold and the technology. The suspicion among modern researchers is that the Cave of Steel wasn't a grave, it was a time capsule, a physical glitch in the geography of the Šumava. In the 1970s, a high-ranking defector from the Czech military claimed that the blue fog wasn't a weapon, it was a natural, catastrophic electromagnetic event. He theorized that the high concentration of limestone and quartz in the Šumava region, combined with the massive amount of steel moving in a tight column, created a Faraday cage on a continental scale.
Did the battalion's 40 metal vehicles and their high-frequency radios trigger a static pocket? Did they walk into a space where time doesn't flow, but pools? It sounds like science fiction, but when you look at the missing persons reports from that specific 3-mile radius over the last 100 years, the numbers don't lie. It's not just the SS. Between 1945 and 1989, over 140 Soviet border guards, Czech foresters, and hikers vanished in that same dead zone. No bodies, no gear, just the blue fog, and then silence.
The modern search. What lies beneath the moss? 1990. The Iron Curtain falls. The Soviet Union is a memory, and for the first time in 40 years, the Šumava Forest is open to the world. A group of independent researchers, including physicists and the elderly sons of the missing 800 men, traveled to the limestone ravine. They weren't looking for war criminals. They were looking for fathers. And they didn't bring shovels. They brought the most advanced subsurface imaging technology on the planet, magnetometers and LiDAR. They expected to find the cave of steel. They expected to find 40 rusted trucks and 800 skeletons. What they found instead defies every law of geology. The LiDAR scans revealed a series of massive, hollow chambers, roughly 50 to 70 feet below the limestone crust. These weren't the jagged, irregular shapes of natural caves. They were perfectly rectangular. They were aligned in a straight line, following the exact path of the old military road. But there was a problem, a terrifying physical impossibility. There was no entrance, no sinkhole, no tunnel. The rock above them was solid, unbroken limestone that had been there for 10,000 years. In 2012, a private expedition secretly drilled a 3-inch borehole into the largest of these chambers. They lowered a fiber-optic thermal-shielded camera into the darkness. The temperature reading sent back by the probe made the lead scientist go pale. It was minus 40 degrees Celsius. In the middle of a July afternoon, 50 feet below a temperate forest, the chamber was at a temperature that should only exist in the Arctic or a laboratory freezer. Within 90 seconds, the camera's electronics, rated for extreme environments, began to fry. But before the feed died, the team saw it. The unmistakable silhouette of an Opel Blitz truck. It wasn't a wreck. It looked like it was waiting for the driver to turn the key. And then, the metal of the camera cable became brittle. When they pulled it back up, it snapped like glass. It had been exposed to what physicists call molecular flash freezing. The Czech government moved in within hours. The expedition was shut down. The borehole was capped with concrete and buried under 5 feet of soil. The official reports cited unexploded ordnance and structural instability of the limestone. The hollow chambers and the frozen trucks were never mentioned again. Today, the Šumava is a national park. It is beautiful. You can hike the trails. You can stand at the exact spot where Sturmbannführer von Hauer's Iron Snake made its last turn. But if you talk to the elders in the nearby villages, the ones who remember the blue fog of 45, they'll tell you to stay on the marked paths. They'll tell you that the forest has a memory, and that sometimes, on the anniversary of the surrender, you can hear the faint, muffled sound of 800 pairs of jackboots marching not on the ground, but under it. 800 men, 40 vehicles, a battalion of the most dangerous soldiers in history, simply deleted from the timeline. Are they still down there, preserved in a limestone tomb that the earth created to stop the war? Is the blue fog a doorway or a shroud? Did they find a gate out of a world that was burning, or did they stumble into a trap set by the planet itself? If you were one of those men, and you saw the fog turning blue and the compasses spinning in circles, would you have turned back to face the Soviet firing squads? Or would you have kept marching into the unknown? Let me know in the comments.
We are looking for anyone with family records, grandfather stories, or death certificates from the 5th Mountain Division. The truth is out there, but it is very, very cold. If you want to see the leaked LiDAR scans the government tried to suppress, click the video on your screen right now. We're going deeper than the history books dare to go. Don't forget to subscribe